Hello, so I'm delighted to be here today with Craig Randal, who has written this book, Trust-Based Observations, which is getting superb reviews in the head teachers forums, I've noticed. So thank you so much for joining me today, Craig.
Thanks, Rebecca. It's a pleasure to be on.
It's also getting amazing reviews on the back here. I was just looking at your list, John Hattie, Michael Fullen, Carol Dweck, and so on. That's not a small roll call of fame.
But for me, feels good. Yep.
It sits really well with these other interviews I've done recently. It's incredibly forensic in the way that it talks about expert practice, so that teachers will feel comfortable if they're working with Craig, that they're connecting with someone and they can take from it what they want, what feels right for them, and adapt it, which is really exciting. So Craig, can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you're coming from with this, and what you're doing?
Sure. Well, I'm from Seattle. I've had a really, I'd say, eclectic professional career. I started out as actually a school counselor and did that for a number of years. And in the US, when you work at a school, oftentimes you coach athletics at the same time. And so I did a lot of that. And then I had a chance to coach small college basketball. And so I switched over and did that for a number of years. And then what I do, so then my wife and I decided we wanted to do international school teaching. That had kind of always been something in our heads. And then we ended up moving to Warsaw, Poland, and working at the American school there. And I taught. And then when I was there, one of the principals said, Craig, you ought to be a principal. And after resisting, I thought, okay, why not? And so I did. And then I met my mentor there, who really, without meeting him, this wouldn't have even come together. And in his supervision class, he just said, you have to be in classes every day. You have to be observing teachers. You have to be supporting them, helping them grow. And it just the light bulb went off, because all my frustrations with observations just seemed to go away. And so he's like, you have to spend an hour a day doing these short 20-minute observations. And so in that, we would do it. And then afterwards, we would, in his class, we would bring little 10-minute lessons, and then we would practice the reflective conversains. And
was this Warren Aller? Warren
Aller, yeah, Warren Aller,
yeah. A lot in the book.
I was just talking to him yesterday. He's an amazing man. And we would start the reflective conversation, and instead of telling people, we would ask. And we asked two questions that still drive it today. What were you doing to help students learn? And if you had it to do over again, what, if anything, might you do differently? And it completely changes everything when you do that. And then we shared strengths. And so anyway, I got an assistant principal job in Korea, and I was really lucky there. I had a principal who'd spent a whole career in the US, and he was at the point in his career where having somebody young and enthusiastic was the thing that drove him most. And that was me. And I said, hey, I have this really interesting way I'd like to do observations. And he said, let's do it. And he did it with me. And it was amazing, because when we did it, I could just tell immediately after we would ask those two questions, we would just share the strengths that we saw. And we just left it at that. We didn't offer advice at first because, one, we see teachers so rarely. What if I offered advice on something and it was something you were good at, I just hadn't seen yet? What was that going to do? And two, if I'm being totally honest, I was the new guy and wanted to be liked. And so I was a little reluctant. But then this amazing thing happened. About the third round through, just a whole bunch of the teachers started to say, okay, Craig, okay, but what can I get better at? And so I didn't know it was trust then. It took me a long time to realize that that's what had happened. But because we had waited, we'd asked them about their teaching and just highlighted their strengths, they trusted. And then they just wanted to get better and wanted the support. And it led to teachers just trying really bold, amazing things, adding to their practice. And the results were astounding. And so then anyway, I got an assistant principal job. Along the way, we went from scripting to developing a form that's morphed a million times since then. And then I was at a school where the head of school said, Craig, I'd like you to show the other principals what you were doing. And so we started meeting every week, and that felt really good to have somebody want me to share what I was doing. And the elementary principal there said, Craig, this is really good stuff. You need to protect your work. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, no, your work, it's really important. I thought, really? And so then I thought, wow, maybe I should present at a conference. And so I did, and it went incredibly well. And they had to bring 20 extra chairs in. And then I thought, wow, I think I'll write an article. And so I did, and it got accepted. And then we ended up coming home from overseas, and we'd saved a little bit of money. And my wife said, why don't you just go for it? So I went to a coffee shop every Monday through Friday, like a job, and I wrote a book, and it was delayed coming out because of the pandemic, but it came out a year ago. And then just with the start of the school year, I've been able to start training schools, and it's been absolutely amazingly, overwhelmingly positive, the response.
So just to highlight, this book is Trust-Based Observations, and I picked it up easily off Amazon, very quickly, arrived the next day, and I found it very easy to read. But
thank you.
The thing I was picking up from it was that you have, I think it's about 10 focus areas that you discuss. I'm just looking at this list that I pulled out. The learning targets and how they're reviewed, risk-taking, innovation, teacher-child rapport, behavior management, cooperative learning, working memory, questioning for higher order thinking, formative assessment, descriptive progress feedback, specific differentiation. And now, from what you've just said, do you train people to start with a much simpler approach where they're first building trust before they launch into those things? Or do you
it's a really, really intense week of training. And so we go right into it. And I'll tell you, every person we train with, the very first day, they're completely overwhelmed. And they're like, I don't know, this form just seems too much, but it's only 9 areas of pedagogy. Like in the US, the main systems have up to 60 areas that they're looking at. And so research says anything more than 10, and as observers, we lose the forest through the trees. We get so busy checking off boxes that we're not actually watching the teaching that's going on and the whole of it. And so over the course of the training, though, it's practice by doing, practice by doing, practice by doing. So by the end of the week, they've actually filled out the form 15 times and they've got it down. And so it sounds daunting at first, but because of the format of the training, the amount of practice you get, they actually are pretty expert in a pretty short period of time.
So do you actually work in a school for a week with the head teacher? Just
the head teacher and whoever else does observations in the school. We found the sweet spot is probably 4 people, any more than 4, and they're not getting the repetition of practice that we want. So they're prepared by the end of the week. But yeah, we're in the school Monday through Friday. It is incredibly intense, but in a mentally and emotional way, because it's so concentrated, but it's so powerful. It's crazy.
You're saying we are in, is it you, or do you work as a team? Or?
Well, I say we because it probably feels less embarrassing than saying I. But
well, you're in England. You're talking to someone in England, and so the Queen does that. So it's, you know.
I'm following the Queen, exactly.
Right.
So I do have one of my former assistant principals became a principal when I left Saudi Arabia, and she just retired. She lives in Kent, actually. Lady Nancy Jenkins. Whose husband was the former ambassador to Saudi from Great Britain. And so she was training with me at the schools I was at, and now she's also doing it because our demand is starting to grow quite a bit.
Yeah, you said you've been working in the UK because your daughter's at university here now, so you're often here.
Well, we just started, but it looks like we'll be it's a great excuse for me to get over and see her. But just with the response that we've had from the trainings we've done in the UK, it looks like we're going to be there a lot.
That's absolutely awesome. So you teach the observers to focus on these areas and work with teachers. And I've also picked up that it really matters the way they capture information, writing down verbatim some of the things the teacher has said. So it creates a trust thing where you're just quoting back to them what you said and allowing them to expand on it, I guess, rather than giving your interpretation.
No. So their words are powerful, and oftentimes they don't know the powerful words that they say, especially related to praise or specific behavior techniques that they use. And so when we can capture their dialogue and read it back to them, it's incredibly powerful. And also, I think maybe even a greater power of it, and I'm just thinking of this right now, is that they realize how intently you were focused on their lesson when you can write back all these details. And when you can capture so many of the details on the form, they're always astounded that we capture so much information in 20 minutes. They're like, I do all that? And it's like, yeah, you really are doing all that. And it's so powerful for them to have their strengths recognized when they're teaching. We actually had a teacher, we did a training out in High Wycombe, and she had the training or she went through the round of reflective conversation, and she, by her own admission, was probably the least willing to take risks and change based on some other previous experiences. That happens more than it should in teacher observation. And at the beginning of the week, we talked about risk taking, and we just said, look, this is the ultimate goal of trust-based observations. It's so that my goal is to build trusting relationships with each one of you teachers, so that you know that if I can come into your class and you're trying something new and it's a complete and total disaster, that the next day you, with absolute certainty, will know that you will receive a fist bump, a high five, or praise of some sort for taking risks. Because when you know that, you will persist in taking risks. And when we persist in taking risks, then I say growth will necessarily follow. And so we had this teacher that said, I was no way in a traditional observation, I would never try anything new. I would, do the dog and pony show. Basically, she didn't say that exactly, but that was what she implied. And she just said, I listened to what you said. And they had just recently done some cooperative learning training at that school. And she went out and she tried some cooperative learning strategies during that lesson. And she got such praise for it because she did an amazing job with that. And she just said, in the end, this is what she said that really struck me most. She said, in the end, all a teacher really wants is to have their strengths noticed and recognized. And she got teary-eyed. And that happens every single week. The teachers get teary-eyed, joyfully teary-eyed at the reflective conversation, which is I take it as a tribute to trust-based observations, but more than that, I take it as an indictment against the way we've done observations in the past, when something that should just be so normal draws that strong of a reaction.
Well, I don't know how much you know of our history here in England, but we've had an offstage regime where inspectors have come in from outside the school for 20 minutes into a lesson and have graded the teaching. Mm-hmm. And it's had horrific consequences. Most of us have seen brilliant teachers completely collapse and their careers ended because of what's happened. So that's the culture you're coming into here, of that having been epidemic, because that was what head teachers were taught to replicate. Now that's those gradings have been taken out. That was a massive effort on a lot of people to persuade the government to take them out.
Thankfully.
So things are starting to change, but that's the background that people here are coming from, and they are very, very scared.
I worked in the UAE for a while, and they basically adopted the British model. And so I was definitely familiar with that. And it's interesting. Some of the people I've trained in this, they've said, I'm so used to looking for what's wrong and what are the next steps forward, that it took them a day or so of training. And we just kept saying, we're playing the long game. We're playing the long game. Let's work from their strengths. And it was really uncomfortable for them to not look for what was wrong. But when they finally got the mindset of like, it's the long game, it's the long game, they felt so freed when they could just focus on the strengths. And instantly their appreciation of the amazing things that are happening in schools just grew. And then when they had these reflective conversations and they see the incredibly positive reaction that teachers have, they're instantly sold and like realize the difference. It's amazing because when we do it, when we have the reflective conversation, first off, we have it in their room, because we always say whether you're 7, 17, or 37, getting called to the principal's or head teacher's office feels like getting called to the head teacher's office. And so we go into their space and we sit beside them instead of across from them, because we sit across from them, that magnifies the hierarchical difference between us. But when we sit across, it creates more of a collegial atmosphere. And almost like I know with my kids as teenagers, sometimes they didn't want to talk as much to us because that's just teenagers. But like when we're driving in a car and we're sitting side by side, somehow that changes and they're way more willing to talk. And I think because this is like this, because we're on the computer asking these questions and typing the responses and sharing everything that we noticed. And it creates this amazing relaxation, so people are comfortable talking. And then as we're going through the form, it's really amazing, even just the first time through. For me, the training has been really interesting because I've always been on this side of the table, but when I'm on the other side of the table and I get to look in at what's going on, I see it from a whole different way. And I watch the teachers and they're leaning in and they're looking at all the areas on the observation form. And they're really curious because it's very specific. And it's just all the elements of good practice in that are magnified. And you can tell their wheels are spinning already about how to get better. One of the recently trained people said, before I always felt like I had to do the heavy lifting, but I watch right now and I can already tell their wheels are spinning and they're doing the heavy lifting. And then one of the other really, I think, is cool things about the form is we have under each category of pedagogy, we have toolbox possibilities. And so that's very specific language or strategies within that strategy that you can use to incorporate practice. So that allows us to be really specific with our language. But above that, we've created it so it's a hyperlink for each category. So if you click on Toolbox Possibilities, instantly it shows like all these books if you want to do a deep dive, but then all these articles and web links to all these articles where I could read something and I could start adding something new to practice. And you can see teachers, I was watching this one teacher and she was looking at questioning. And the questioning that she did was perfect for the lesson that she had. It just didn't tap on the very top layers because it wasn't that type of lesson. But so many teachers are self-reflective and overly critical. I could tell she was bothered by that. And we were like, no, it's fine. But so we were like, showed her the Toolbox Possibilities and I could see her wheels spinning. And the next day I said, you looked at that last night, didn't you? And she said, yeah, I did. I was looking at the articles. It was great. So anyway, that was a really long answer, Ty. I can't remember what your question was anymore.
Well, I've been hypnotized by it because it just takes me back to the culture of teaching that I began in, where although maybe not all these things were explicitly said, they were the underlying assumptions of what was good practice. And it wasn't just about the head teacher-teacher relationship. It was hearing things there that I was taught to do with students. So if I had a student who'd kicked off, and I'd maybe taken them out of the room, just given them 10 minutes to calm down and for their hormones to calm down a bit, the way that I would approach them and try and talk to them, either stand beside them, or sometimes they'd be standing up where I was talking to them and I would actually crouch down and look up to them. Put the focus back onto them in the conversation dynamic. But that's my journey. But there'll be a lot of teachers out there who may be watching, or head teachers, who won't be able to access your training because maybe they don't have the resource or that they're not in the position to decide to buy it for their school. If they could change one or two things, what advice would you give them?
Okay, I want to address what you just said first, though. Okay, so I think that one, we do have training and it costs us money to travel and do everything, but we'll do everything in our power to find a way to work with people. And even if what we charge doesn't work, we have ways that we can help them to find ways that work and tap into that. So we do everything we can to train everyone we possibly can. Having said that, I realize there still might be situations where it doesn't work. And so the first thing I'll say is don't rate teachers. Don't rate their pedagogy. You don't have to do it anymore. There's no requirements to do it anymore, certainly in the UK, to my knowledge. And so the research shows as soon as we rate teachers, Matt O'Leary out of Birmingham, up in your lovely country, has done all this research that shows as soon as we start to rate teachers, they tend to play it safe. They have less relational trust with their administrator. And the result is less risk-taking, innovation, and creativity in practice. And so don't rate teachers because that does nothing to improve practice. And then the other really, really big thing is just use those two questions. Don't tell, ask. What were you doing to help students learn? If you had it to do over again, what, if anything, might you do differently? Listen. Share the strengths, be as specific as you can, use their language like we talked about, and maybe most importantly of all, use your best emotional intelligence when you're interacting with people, because the way we talk to people matters. And relating to just what you were saying about maybe the boy that was struggling and you had to have a conversation with him, if we think about what best practice is for teachers giving feedback to students, there's a massive hypocritical divide between that and the way teacher observations have gone for the last decades. So if we were to just use best practice for teachers to students, and now as administrator, I'm a teacher and my teachers are my students, then that's going to make an enormous difference in what we're doing as well.
One of the things that I thought when I was reading all these things that observer is going to have to advise teachers on, I just thought you're going to have to be an incredibly highly skilled head teacher to know how to mentor teachers, any teacher that you come across, because teachers are so diverse in the subjects they teach and the ages they're teaching on any of this. How do you overcome that if you're a head teacher or an observer who is observing teachers where you really don't know what good practice is in their subject or their age group or their area that you're observing?
It's a great question. So look, we were talking about math and your background in math before the interview started. I'm not an expert in math at all, but good pedagogy is good pedagogy. And it doesn't matter whether I'm teaching 3-year-olds, because we observe 3-year-old classes, all the way up to 18-year-olds. All the things on the form, those apply to every single subject in terms of what we're doing. And so That part doesn't change no matter what. However, I will say, if I don't feel like I'm expert enough in any one of those areas, you can just use, I mean, you can go to trustbase.com, have me send you a copy of the observation form, and then you can use that toolbox possibilities to up your own game in your own school skill level. So listen, part of the reason that I became as expert as I did was creating those toolbox possibilities as I read every single article that was on there. And so if I feel like there's one of those or a couple of those areas that I'm not as strong in some of the other areas, then do a deep dive. The tools are right there on the observation form to allow you to do a deep dive to get better in those areas.
So where do people get those resources from, and how do they contact you?
Well, trustbase.com is the website, and they're on the website, there's a link that, or a tab that says form, and then you fill out a little thing, and then it comes to you within the next 24 hours. And then they can get a hold of me there, but my email is craig@trustbase.com. Pretty easy to remember.
Okay, and what can people get for free?
They can get the observation form for free. There's definitely other podcasts that they can listen to. There are articles that they can see. So those are the.
And this book is very reasonably priced as well. I can't remember what I paid for this, but it was just a standard paperback price.
Yeah.
Really accessible. Okay, now the other question I had about observation was, if I've got any other adult in the room as a teacher, if I have a child who, you've got a child who's just, you see them crumpling and there's something going on for them, and there may be something that happened at break that they really need to talk about. If I've got another adult in the room, and I'm teaching at the time, I'm going to nudge that other adult to that child, and it makes a real positive difference in the classroom environment. How do you deal with situations like that? Do you get involved, or are you absolutely a bystander who is not involved in that classroom?
It depends on this. So there's no ironclad answer. What I can tell you, I'll tell you a couple of things. One part of the observation also is we do a student interview to talk about like what they're supposed to be learning and how they could demonstrate that learning, because we want to measure intent versus impact. So I know that's not exactly part of it. So we're always interacting with the kids a little bit every observation, and sometimes more depending on if it's a lab or more active teaching situation. But if there was ever a situation where it was someone not able to hold it together, or something had happened, like you said, and so they were struggling, anything could happen. I mean, we could close the laptop and just go, you know what, I'm going to help out and do what's here. I mean, we have to use our best instincts and gut to try and help in a situation. It's more important that I help out if I need to than to be able to like get my observation in. I can get my observation in tomorrow. And so I mean, if we're practicing trust-based observations and all the care that's about it, wouldn't the care mean that we help out however we're best needed in the moment?
Thank you for that, because that is something that's been part of the culture of observations, that you have to be non-impactful on the classroom, and you completely the other way. It's great.
That's absurd. It's absurd that we would act like that. I mean, come on. It drives me crazy to hear stuff like that, but I know it happens.
And I guess the final question is, how do you have the difficult conversations? There's a chapter or two on it towards the end of this, but I thought it'd be lovely to hear it in your words. Yeah.
I mean, so we don't rate pedagogy, but we do rate professionalism, planning and preparation, and collegiality. And then we also rate mindset, but we set you up so you'll be proficient in mindset just as long as you're an active participant. So when we have a difficult conversation, one of the things that we always recommend doing is making sure that we have a conversation with our assistants or our deputies to talk about it with them and to get their advice and make sure it's not just me seeing something, and that usually everyone's observing, so we're in alignment. But along with that, we also talk about like what answers might we hear that would surprise us, denials or anything like that. And if that happens, how do we respond ahead of time? So if you think about what are the crazy answers that you might not expect to hear, that helps you be more prepared. I think another thing is that we come, and when we have these conversations, we have a very positive intent, and we talk about our goal being that 6 months from now, this is hopefully something we can all laugh at, like what an amazing transformation and progress that we've had. We offer support. It's not just get better, but this is support and what it looks like, whether that's pairing you with an expert teacher, whether that's my coming in more frequently to support you, whether that's sending you to a training, whatever that is, and it's continuing support during that process. But it's also being truthful about, look, I have to tell you that the final straw, if we don't get there, could lead to termination, because we want to be transparent as well. And so it's kind of all those things together. And then the other thing I'd say is, whenever possible, I would always have a difficult conversation with another, like the assistant or deputy in the room, just because sometimes it can help. Sometimes that person might have a better relationship with you. And then it's also just another, just in case it ever gets there, it's another set of eyes just for accountability. So really, in a nutshell, that's what it is.
Okay, thank you so much. I've worked in some fabulous schools recently, and I've seen elements of this in there, and I'm not quite sure where it's come from, but where schools are clearly thriving, this trust exists. So if you're a head teacher who wants to build this trust, this is a great guide for you. Thank you so much for your time today, Craig. I really appreciate it. If you do something good in the future, please come back and do another interview. If you have something to talk about, that'd be cool.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Rebecca. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You're so welcome.